This would be the left common carotid. And so it's going to go up and it's going to branch, that brachiocephalic branches into the right common carotid and the right subclavian. Here's also common carotid up here. You can see a little bit of it right here on the left side, the left common carotid. Okay? So that's the one that you take a pulse of in the neck, the common carotid. Okay? Now, the common carotid, you guys, the next thing is their right and left common carotid arteries. They're going to divide, and a branch is going to go through the temporal bone to give a lot of blood to the brain. And that's going to be the internal carotid. The other branch stays on the outside and gives blood to the head, to the face, and stuff like that. And that's going to be the external carotid. Okay? The only place on these models that you see that is with this guy right here. Here's your common carotid artery coming up. And here you can see it branch right here. The branch that doesn't have any other branches on it, this one that's more towards the back, would be the internal carotid artery right there. The external carotid artery is going to have a bunch of branches on it. And so that's the external carotid. Now, the other model that shows this is our skull model. Common carotid right here. Okay? And you can see it branch. This one that has this little branch on it, just ignore that. Okay? But it goes up and you can see it going through the temporal bone. Okay? This one here. And so that would be the internal carotid. This one that stays out here that gives a whole bunch of branches is the external carotid. Okay? So you got the external carotid. So, the external carotid, I'm just going to jump down to it real quick. There's about 5 branches of it. I'm only going to have you learn 2 of them, okay? And that's the one that wraps around the jaw here. That's what this represents, would be the facial artery. And this one that goes right in front of the ear would be the temporal artery. Don't see them that great on this, but you see them real good here. Here's the facial artery. Here's the temporal artery. In fact, you can feel your temporal pulse, artery pulse right here in front of your ear. That's your temporal artery. You can see it here too. Facial, temporal. Over here, temporal, facial. Facial artery, temporal artery. This little bit right here, common carotid. Right there. We okay with that part?
Where's the common?
Right here. This is the right side, yeah. Okay, so that internal carotid, back up to where you can see that there's a couple branches there. So it's going to come through the temporal bone through that temporal canal, remember? And it's going to go in, that internal carotid is going to come up through did I say temporal before?
Yeah.
Sorry. We're talking internal carotid artery. Okay, right there. So it's going to go through the temporal bone through the carotid canal. Okay, sorry. And it's going to turn into cerebral arteries, a middle and an anterior cerebral artery. Okay. And so the middle is going to basically give blood to the frontal lobe on the outside and the temporal lobe and all that. So on this model here, this little stub here represents the internal carotid artery. And it's giving this branch out here. That would be the middle cerebral artery. If you pop this open, this would be your anterior cerebral artery right here. So here's the middle cerebral, anterior. That's why on this guy here, this would really represent the anterior cerebral artery. Okay. So, now on this guy, you can see him. Here, my Q-tip is showing you the internal carotid artery coming through right here. Okay. Now my Q-tip is on the middle cerebral. So that's your middle cerebral. branching out like that. This right here is your anterior cerebral. That's your anterior cerebral. Okay. Okay. Now, the two anterior cerebrals, you can see them right here. They have a connection between them, and that's that little connection right there that connects the two anterior cerebrals, and that's the anterior communicating. Right there. Anterior communicating. Okay? We're going to come back to some of this in a second. Subclavian arteries, they're called that because they're right under the clavicle. Okay? As soon as they come out over the first rib, they're going to change names. Okay? So the subclavian, there's three main branches to it. Only two of them we're going to show you because one of them we don't have on any of the models. The first is the internal thoracic artery, but most people call it the internal mammillary. This is going to come off, and this runs right here, underneath the sternum, along the side of it and the ribs. I want you to point this out because this one is harvested. It's cut at one end a lot and used in bypasses. And they'll plug the other end of it. The end that they cut, they plug into the heart. Okay. Also, along that artery and vein there is where you have some lymphatics that run. And so they're right underneath in here. And those do drain the breast, and that is one pathway for metastatic breast cancer to get in. And we do not sample those lymph nodes. They're too hard to get to. So, internal mammillary or the internal thoracic artery. The other branch you need to know comes off the subclavian is the vertebral artery, and that's what this is right here. Remember that artery that runs up in those transverse foramen of the cervical vertebrae? That's the vertebral artery. And you can see it here, both of them coming up through the foramen magnum. So those are vertebral arteries right there coming up through there. Okay? Then what they do is they come together and join this artery called the basilar artery. See how they kind of connected to join that one artery right there? That sits right on the brainstem. That's what the brainstem is sitting right on top of that basilar artery. Okay. The last branch of that basilar artery right there, okay, that's the posterior cerebral. Posterior cerebral right there.
Can I see it?
Where you at? Posterior cerebral. Now, there's a connection between the posterior cerebral and the middle, and that's the posterior communicating right there. See that posterior communicating? Right there. So posterior cerebral, posterior communicating, middle, anterior cerebral, anterior communicating. So, if you notice, this thing forms like a circle here. Okay? With the pituitary right in the middle. What those communicating arteries are, posterior communicating, anterior communicating, is the other term is they're called collateral arteries. Because if you got a blockage somewhere, then things can backflow through those to get back to what you blocked. Okay, so for example, if you threw a clot or you clotted off your internal carotid artery right here, okay, you're going to get backflow from the posterior communicating and the anterior communicating over to this middle cerebral. And so it's going to lessen your chances of getting a really bad stroke.